I try to be as inclusive as possible on this video, but you really need some kind of a service manual as well. First things first, we'll take the wheel off. Remove the 4 bolts that keeps the engine splash cover in. Put a piece of wood on a jack and jack it up just until it touches the oil pan. Now remove the 2 bolts and 2 nuts for the motor mount. There we go. Next, we'll remove the power steering pump. Well, first we have to take off the serpentine belt actually, and I don't know if you can see it, but I have a breaker bar on the tensioner. I don't know if you can see that very well. So I just pull down on it and then pull the serpentine belt off. All right, now it's just 2 14mm bolts to get the power steering pump out. It's not a bad idea to put the power steering pump in some bags to keep the dirt out. Also, the power steering lines, some bags and some zip ties. Now I'll go ahead and take the tensioner off. I think that's a 14 mil. I'll let you know in a second. And then, I don't know if you can see it, but there's an idler pulley. I'm going to take that off as well. Okay, so we got the tensioner pulley and the belt came with it. Those are actually 12mm bolts. Now we'll take off the idler, and that is a millimeter. Okay, so the idler pulley is off. Now it's time to take off the harmonious balancer pulley. The best way I found to do that is with a strap wrench. I'll show you how to do that in a second. Okay, so what you have to do is lace the belt part around the harmonic balancer, and there's a little plastic timing tab. You have to lace it underneath the tab, and then you'll see that the handle lands on the alternator pulley, and then you take a breaker bar. I used a 1/2-inch breaker bar. I already broke it loose. Now you can just finger loosen it the rest of the way. And this harmonic balancer is not pressed on. You just grab it and shake it. There we go. Now we just have a whole mess of 10mm bolts to take out on the bottom and all these on the top as well. Here's the crack. There's the crank pulley, and if you go up a little, that's where it's cracked. Okay, so we got the crank gear lined up. You can see that roll pin, and I don't think you see it, but there's a little divot that lines up perfectly with that little tang right there. And we'll come up top and look at the cam gear, and it is lined up with this little machine dealio on the valve cover. So they're lined up, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to zip tie the belt to the sprocket on both and see if I can move the belt around without losing the timing on the cams. Okay, so now we have the zip ties holding the belt on the cam sprockets on both sides. And now I'm going to release the tension on the belt. I'm sure there's more than one way to release the tension, but I just took the tensioner out as 2 12mm bolts. Alright, so in order to get the crank sprocket off, there's a little spot right here where my finger is, and you can get a slide hammer in there. Let's see. I doubt I can. Let's see if I can do this on camera. I've already got it started. Okay, it grabs. Nope, I'm gonna break something. All right, so we got the crank. So we got the crank sprocket out, and in the process, I broke that little piece. I guess the puller I was using didn't have enough of a lip here, because it just snapped that. So I guess I'll have to get a new one of those. And now you can see in the oil pump a little bit better. You can see where it's cracked. Where are we at? Right there. That's where it's cracked at. So this big oil pump assembly is also a bracket for the alternator. So we're going to take out this 14mm nut. It's sandwiched, so it should just be able to loosen it and then pick the alternator up out of the way. And on top, we have a 12mm, which is right here. Little 12mm bolt. So we got everything off of the front side of the motor now. So we'll put the motor mount back in place, and then we can remove the jack stand from the bottom of the engine. Alright, so I'll put the alternator out of the way. You can see that little U bracket. That's part of the oil pump. So I move the alternator out of the way, and I put the motor mount back in. I hold on it pretty good because it's supporting the engine. And now underneath the car, we're going to have to take the oil pan. We're going to drop the oil pan. So to do that, we're going to have to remove some of the exhaust. So I spritzed it down with some WD. Probably didn't give it enough time for it to actually work. But these two have already loosened, and I've got to take off this collector and then this one. And then okay, so it's just two 17mm nuts and then two 17mm bolts. And the flex allows you to pull the collector down past the studs. And then I just zip tied it out of the way. Maybe it could hang, I'm not sure. One more thing, whenever you're working with anything old or exhaust, use 6 points. Don't use 12-point sockets, or you very well could round off the nut or bolt. Alright, so I got the 10mm bolt out of the oil pan, and I had the best luck using a scraper right here, right by the oil filter, and a hammer. I was able to hammer it in, and now it's trying to move. So I'll drop this pan here in a second. Alright, here's the oil pan. I have some gasket scraping to do, and I already scraped the gasket on the engine block, and came out pretty good. Here's a scraper that I used. It worked quite well. And where is that other? I had to use a scribe. There's these little eyebrow looking things. Where are we at? Okay, there we go. These little guys here. And I used the scribe and I was able to get most of the RTV. It's a black RTV is what they use, so I'll be putting black RTV back on. Okay, so now we have 5 12mm bolts. There's 1, 2, 3, maybe you can't see the other 2. One's behind the dipstick, 4, and then 5. Here's the top oil pan bolts, or I'm sorry, oil pump. We got a medium, 3 shorts, and then a long. And to get that dipstick tube out, we have this flange right here. There's a 12mm bolt holding it in, and then it's just like a press fit. You just give it a nice tug and it'll come out. Okay, so we're back underneath the car. We're going to take off the pickup. That's just those 2 12mm bolts right there. And then if you look up a bit, you can see those 2 bolts in the corner. Those go to the oil pump and then come to the other side. I got those other 2 bolts. We're going to take those off as well. And they're all 12mm. Okay, we're going to have to take the aluminum oil pan off as well to get the oil pump off. So one of the things we'll do, this is AC compressor. There's a 12mm bolt right here. We're going to take off the 2 lower ones because it connects to the oil pan. The upper ones connect to the block itself. Here's a better shot of those 2 bolts here and then there. Okay, still working on the oil pan. I took out this little flywheel observer deal. You just have to push on that tang right there. It pops out. And then this is still part of the oil pan. So these are 14mm bolts. These here are 10s. Then you have a couple of 12s all the way around. And then we'll have to take the steel pan back off, and there's a few more 12mm bolts. Then we can fight with this aluminum oil pan and drop it. Alright, more things to remove. In order to drop the aluminum part of the pan, whatever you want to call it, gotta take the starter out. There is a 14mm nut holding that terminal on. 12mm. And then the mounting hardware, there's a bolt on this side, then there's a nut up here. Those are both 14s. Okay, so you actually have to take the starter out because it's hiding 3 more 12mm bolts for this aluminum oil pan. Okay, so I believe I've got all the outer bolts out of the oil pan. Now it's just these last 3 inners. If you remember, I said 3. Oh yeah, there's a 3rd one. If you remember, I took these 4 out earlier because those go directly to the pump. I probably don't have to separate them, but I always like to bag and tag everything. Alright, so we got all the bolts out for the aluminum pan, and it is RTV'd every which way, so the best place to get it, we have this aluminum boss right here that goes to the air compressor. And got your pry bar, and you can see it's already trying to move. Whoop, it was. But I cannot film and do this at the same time, but we'll drop this thing. All right, so I had good luck prying up front, but it's still stuck in the back. And Hyundai, being the geniuses they are, they put a threaded hole here, and then it bottoms out, or it stops at the block. So I took the starter bolt and I threaded it through. It didn't thread in. You have to understand, this is an open hole, open threaded hole. So there's some carbon buildup. So it took me a few tries to get the starter bolt to go, but it's going in pretty easy. It's bottomed out, and I'm just gonna, work it, back and forth a little bit till I get this oil pan to pop off. Okay, so we got the aluminum oil pan down. Last night I fought with it. I was able to break it free, but I couldn't get it to drop through all the other stuff. And the problem was I had the steel pan on still, so that the lips were just too great, and it was just giving me too much interference. So took the steel pan off, and then within like 15 seconds I was able to maneuver the aluminum pan out. All right, we are underneath the car, and look at this 4-bolt main with a main girdle. That is, Hyundai built this thing for the drag strip. But if you look right here, we have the oil pump, and I've already moved it a little bit using a brass punch. Just hitting it right here. I'm going to alternate back and forth, and we'll go ahead and get this oil pump off. Okay, so the new oil pump is in. We'll do a test fitment, and then we'll RTV it up. Okay, so we got the pump test fit on. I used some engine assembly lube that I had. Engine oil will work just as good. The reason I test fit it on is because the pump is keyed up a certain way to go on the crankshaft. So I got it lined up. I'll pull it off, RTV it, put it back on, and torque it down. All right, the new pump is in. Torque down to 132 inch-pounds. Okay, so we got the oil pan as clean as I'm going to get it. I have a theory that when you RTV these, you're supposed to RTV it from the top, like from the engine block, and then it would get in this little channel. The way I did the oil pump and the way I'm going to continue doing this is RTV it here and just kind of pack it in a little bit. I'm not going to go crazy on the RTV, but just a nice, try to do a nice continuous film. Okay, so I went around it once, kind of like this, and it just fills in that channel perfectly. I'm going to go through again and just kind of, with my finger, just kind of go around the holes a little bit, except for right here. I don't want to get the O-rings go right there, so I don't want to mess with that. But I want to go through and just put a little bit more RTV, but it falls right into place if you just kind of do this little dealio. Alright guys, I'm totally freestyling this. I decided to only put RTV on this side of the channel, and I kind of do that the whole way around. If it leaks, I'll let you know, and you should probably put it on the whole thing if it does leak, but yeah, we'll see. Alright, so the upper aluminum pan is back on. The 12mm bolts are torqued down to 17 foot-pounds. And then these 14 mil get 26, and these little guys here, these 10s, they're 60 inch-pounds. I got me a little helper. So I don't know how many times I've used RTV and gaskets, and I seem to invent a new way every time. So on the bottom of the gasket, I did a thin coat of RTV, and on the top, since we got this blue, I don't know what it is, fluoromister, elastomer, I don't know what it is. I'm making up words. I just did a thin black coat on the other side. Guys, I don't know if that's how you're supposed to do it. I just make it up as I go. But and if it leaks, I'll be honest with you and say, hey, do it differently. But there we go. About to put the oil pan on. Okay, 108 inch-pounds on the steel oil pan. And got the starter in place, and I looked up in my manual and there's no torque specs on that, so just good and tight. And don't forget to put on the red spade terminal, or blade terminal, I don't know what you call them, and then the 12mm positive terminal. Let's go ahead and cover that. And again, German specs on those. starter cover. All right, now we bolted the exhaust back on. I couldn't find, where are we at? I couldn't find any torque specs, so I just bottomed it out and then hulked on it a bit. Okay, so I got the dipstick tube pressed in, and it was a little bit more difficult than I thought. It had to be directly centered, then it took a lot of pressure, so look out for that. Okay, we got our new crank sprocket in. I'll go ahead and just slide it on. All right, it's on. Kind of jumping around, but now I tightened down the AC compressor. Couldn't find torque specs. Again, just bottom it out, and I used a 3/8 ratchet where I could and a wrench where I couldn't, and just gave it a little extra bit. All right, after some aggravation, we got the alternator back onto the oil pump. Yeah, oil pump. I think this oil pump might be a little bit thicker because I had a lot of trouble getting the alternator to sit down on it. A lot of wiggling and pushing. Finally got it to get in place, and then I had trouble getting the upper bolt, which I don't know if you can see it. Oh yeah, you can see it right there. Then I had trouble getting that one to line up, so what I did was took essentially a scribe, just something to kind of poke into that hole and kind of wiggle it back and forth and figure out how much area I need to move it up or down. So got that. That top bolt is torqued down to, did I already forget? I'll just put it in the text. And the bottom bolt is 33 foot-pounds. All right, so I'm gonna do the ratchet approach to get the belt tight here. I'm gonna turn the crank back a bit and grab it, say up here. I'm gonna pull it back until it's tight. We want it to be tight, and you see that little, okay, we got the roll pin, follow it up to that gear, and then you see a little divot. Okay, once that divot lines up with that machine part on the oil pump, we're in time so long as we have no tension here. And then I'll put the tensioner back in on this side, and that'll soak up the rest of the tension on that side. All right, you're gonna need a vise to compress the tensioner back down, put the grenade pin back in, and let's see if we can't install this back on the Hyundai. All right, zip ties for the win. I was able to do that ratchet strap thing with the crank. So what I did was look at the roll pin. Whenever I had a lot of slack on the belt, I brought the roll pin up to about 12 o'clock. Then I brought it back to where it lined up, and it pulled all the slack, kept the cams in time, and I had so much slack on the tensioner side, I was able to easily put the tensioner pulley in and bolt the tensioner down. Actually, I bolted the tensioner down first, and then I did the pulley. So I'm going to torque this down to, and then I'll torque this one to, and then I'll go ahead and pull the grenade pin, and we'll release the tension. Okay, so the timing covers are on. Those bolts get torqued down to 108 inch-pounds. Quick tip for you, there's a bolt right here. This is the bolt that meets the upper and lower timing covers. This is the longest bolt. And then you have the bolt right here. Let's see if you can see into there. That one's the medium bolt, and the rest of them are shorties, and it doesn't matter where you put them. I broke a strap wrench last night trying to torque down the harmonic balancer or crankshaft bolt. So I bought another one from O'Reilly's and promptly broke that one too. So we'll find another way to torque it down. But in the meantime, I'm going to put the idler pulley on, and it goes, I'll put my finger on it, kind of behind the motor mount. We'll put the belt tensioner on. I can't find the torque specs on it, so German torque on it. Okay, so just beneath the motor mount you can see the idler pulley. It's on there, and I wrenched on it with a 3/8 drive ratchet and just gave a little bit extra once it bottomed out. I got the tensioner on. You need to leave the belt, the smooth side on the tensioner. And now we'll go ahead and put on the power steering pump. Same thing, I might be able to find the torque specs on that one. Power steering pump is on. I couldn't find any real guidance or clear guidance on the mounting bolts. It said that the long bolts get torqued to this number and the short bolts get torqued to another number, but the mounting bolts are the same length. So I did 18 foot-pounds because that was kind of a happy median between the two, but I guess just follow your heart. I'm sure good and tight would work just fine. Ooh, there's a strange little stump connector. Let's put that thing in. And we'll do the lines, get the belt, and I think we're pretty close to starting it. All right, so the belt is on. I topped off the power steering fluid, reconnected the battery, and I disconnected all the coil wires. I'm going to turn the engine over a few times, get the oil circulating. It'll also burp the power steering, and then we'll fire it up. Okay, so after breaking 2 strap wrenches, I was finally able to torque down that crank bolt. It gets 135 foot-pounds. I put a 1/4 inch punch between the bell housing and the flywheel teeth. I wasn't in love with the idea, but I figured a punch should be stronger than 135 foot-pounds of force. So I went for it and got lucky. Again, follow your hearts and do what you're comfortable with. Well, it's been a few days since we got it back together, and here's the best part. Starts right up. Well, all good things must come to an end. I'm glad this one's over, honestly. This may come to a shock to you, but I doubt this would be a video that the new Hyundai mechanic recruits would watch as a training video, but I think it gets a point across. At least, man, I tried my best. You know, it's not easy changing an oil pump on any car, let alone a car that's, you know, within 20 years old. Working outside, whenever it was cold and rainy. Whenever it was nice, the mosquitoes would come out, and the no-see-ums and the dementors. So what? You know what? I'm not going to film it, but this weekend I'm probably going to change the oil filter just because there might be some extra crud I got in the crankcase. So just as a feel good, I'm going to change the oil filter and just top it off with a pint of oil or whatever that oil filter takes up. Again, you really need some kind of a Chilton Haynes service manual. And thank you for watching. Until next time.